You just keep thinking, Butch. That's what you're good at.
Boy, I got vision and the rest of the world wears bifocals.
Hello and welcome once again to the Cine-Files, where each week we enter the world of a great film. We explore its themes, the history, the filmmaking, and the influence it has on us today. My name is Steve Morris, and I'm a filmmaker and directing instructor in Los Angeles, California.
Hello, everyone. My name is John Rocha. I'm a writer, producer, and host, and voiceover guy here in San Diego, California.
And in our last Cine-Files Advisory Board meeting, which you could access by going to patreon.com/thecine-files and join our advisory board, we had a discussion both about this last month we did on Donald Sutherland, and then also about movies that we are going to do in the future. And one of the things that came up was that it was really fun to do two movies of the same actor over different periods. And that led us, as we're looking at our ginormous list of movies yet to do, to a discussion of maybe doing that again, which led us in turn to picking not one, not two, but three films to do. And those three films are the incredible Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid.
Yes.
And not a sequel, but the same pairing and the same director, following with The Sting and one of John's all-time favorite movies that he's wanting to do forever, which is The Verdict. So that is Robert Redford, Paul Newman, and finally Paul Newman in one of his last incredible performances. And that's what we're doing over the next 6 weeks, 2 months. This is a long time.
Yeah, it's going to be 6 to 8 weeks, I think, especially leading off with Butch Cassidy and Sundance Kid, which has so much historical significance. I don't think the other two movies do. So there's a lot we're going to be talking about in the first part of this particular movie, the Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. But yeah, I'm looking forward to it. 3 fantastic movies back to back to back. And I hope you all are ready. It's kind of a mini Paul Newman season, I guess, but it just kind of worked out the way that it did. So we're excited to jump into it. And of course, we'll have other stuff because that's going to lead us almost right into the holidays with Halloween coming up.
Get into Halloween, yeah.
Yeah, and then Christmas, which is crazy to think about already that we're around the corner from that, Steve.
And I believe we've also chosen, which I am not going to reveal at this time, but we've also chosen what our Halloween movie is going to be with our advisory board. And this is what's so great about joining the advisory board. Of course, that's a more expensive tier. There are other great tiers on patreon.com/thecine-files where you can get ad-free versions of the show. You can watch, listen to our Cine-Files shorts, make suggestions, and even ask some questions about movies that we're doing, which might appear on the podcast, including some questions I have from our patrons today about Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. But if you're not into the Patreon thing, of course, on Apple Podcasts, you can subscribe where you get ad-free versions of the show and access to our Cine-Files shorts. But maybe the most exciting thing about us doing Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid is that they go to a country called Bolivia, and the Cine-Files resident Bolivian will be leading the rest of this discussion. So John, will turn it over to you because I am super excited to jump into Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid.
And just to clarify, my blood is Bolivian. My parents are Bolivian. I am American by birth, but I am Bolivian by blood. So there's no distinct difference in that way. So, and this is one of the reasons why Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid has always had a special place in my heart, because when do you ever hear about Bolivia other than in Scarface or Butch Cassidy and Sundance Kid? It's a really rare country in South America that gets mentioned, but this is actually a true story. Yes, did they go to Argentina first, then Chile, then Bolivia? Yes, but they died in Bolivia, and so we lay claim to them dying in Bolivia, supposedly, which we'll get into, of course, later on in the film as we have this discussion. But yes, ladies and gentlemen, I am taking this on. I am the outlaw. It is a Western, but I am absolutely, with my knees knocking, I'll be admitting this to you guys right off the bat, because this is probably the most gargantuan film I've had to do where I have been leading it on the channel, or leading us rather on the show, and I love the movie so much, and I really love our podcast so much that I hope I do it justice. And I know my own Sundance Kid writing with me on this one will make sure to keep me on track here. Somebody say 1, 2, 3, go. So yeah, basically that's basically what we're doing in all of this. So put on your best cowboy hat, or put on your spurs. And get ready for this one, because we're going to have some fun talking about this film. So, all right, here we go, Steve. Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, an incredible revisionist Western that was nominated for 7 Academy Awards, winning 4 of them, directed by George Roy Hill, starring Paul Newman, arguably on an incredible decades-long apex as an actor and the film that launched Robert Redford as a superstar based on the actual Butch Cassidy and Sundance Kid. This is a film that I thoroughly love and have enjoyed many times throughout my life. But before we get to how I got into the film and when I first watched the film, Steve, what are your experiences with the film? What's your first time watching the movie?
I have no idea. This is definitely a movie that I had seen. And again, we talked about this a lot, is that you didn't necessarily come into a movie at the beginning. So I had seen pieces of this movie over and over again before I ever saw the opening. You know, because you just came in. It's like, oh, it's Butch and Son. Oh, they're being chased by the super posse. Oh, we're up at the hole in the wall. Oh, we're down in Bolivia. Wherever it was that it was on TV, I jumped in. I have absolutely zero memory of seeing this the first time. It has simply always existed. But I will say that coming back to it, maybe in college or when I was in film school, it's so great to discover that this thing that you love is also great. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
Like it wasn't like we were just talking about in our live show about Robin Williams, and we were talking about Happy Days. Now, Happy Days I loved.
Yeah.
But I know that if I went back to watch some Happy Days today, it would not necessarily hold up as great cinema. Whereas Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid I loved, and going back and just watching it in the last couple of days, I'm like, oh, this is such a great fucking movie.
Absolutely. And when I was, I'm with Steve. I don't remember the first time I watched this movie. I just know that I've always known about this movie. So I feel like I must have watched it when I was a kid. I would imagine that my parents saw it in the theaters. It's the year before I was born, 1969. And I imagine they saw it in the theaters, and the word Bolivia was a big deal. And and I'm sure my parents, having grown up in Bolivia, knew about the legend of Butch Cassidy and Sundance Kid being killed in Bolivia. So the fact that it was a movie, I'm sure as soon as it came on the TV in Metro Media 5 or WDCA 20 there in DC/Virginia, it was on. So I've just always known about this movie, and my mother was such a massive Paul Newman crush. She had a massive crush on Paul Newman. And Robert, it's funny, she didn't have a thing for Robert Redford, but she had a thing for Paul Newman. She always felt that Redford was a bit scraggly, but she liked Paul Newman. I don't know. Did your mom have a crush on either one of these two men there, Steve?
I've never asked my mom if she had a crush on. That is not something. Now I'm going to obviously have to ask her.
Yeah.
I've never really heard my mom saying anything like I had a crush on any star ever. I can't remember ever hearing that.
Wow. That's fascinating. Because she had a thing for JFK, she had a thing for Elvis, and she had a thing for Paul Newman. This I knew from the dawn of time with my mother. So this is a fascinating film to be opening the door to. So, you know how we do these things? We talk about pre-production, we talk about biographies, we talk about the things that are important about the movie. So I'm going to do my best here to wrangle, to use a cowboy term, all the pre-production stuff that was involved in this one. Steve, this is where we usually bring up pre-production, right? Is this correct?
Yeah.
Is there anything else? Okay, good.
You're doing great.
Thank you, Sundance. All right. So this was originally called The Sundance Kid and Butch Cassidy because originally the studio wanted Paul Newman to be the Sundance Kid. George Roy Hill claims in a 42-minute behind-the-scenes documentary about the making of this movie, which you can hear that he narrates, by the way. He narrates this 42-minute documentary. And he says very strongly, I always wanted Paul for Butch. No one seemed to believe in the studio as the one who wanted Sundance. So it was originally called The Sundance Kid and Butch Cassidy. It wasn't changed around until Paul Newman himself wanted to play Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. The production began in early 1968 when they were first kind of putting this all together. It was announced in Hollywood Reporter that Paul Newman and George Roy Hill would be attached to this film, and that William Goldman would be writing the screenplay for this. And by the way, Paul Newman was involved in the process with William Goldman. William Goldman came to him and pitched him this idea, and they worked together on the script. Not that Paul Newman wrote the script. It was more a matter of them working together, talking things out, and what have you. And in May of 1968, it was stated that Robert Redford would co-star with Paul Newman in this movie. They shot this in Utah and Colorado, as well as Taxco, which I don't know where that is, and Cuernavaca, Mexico. Those are the locations that they shot the movie in. And as I said, Newman stated that Goldman discussed his ideas for the development of a script on the little-known Outlaws with him prior to writing it. They were not that well-known, Butch Cassidy and Sundance Kid, until this film came out. And here's an interesting part. Newman was later contacted by actor Steve McQueen, who apparently had got a copy of the completed script and suggested they co-star in the film. After reading the script, Newman, who assumed he would play the role of Sundance, because of the studio, recommended that he and McQueen jointly purchase the property, but McQueen hesitated, and that's where he fell out of this whole process. And in March of 1983, there was an item here where Marlon Brando stated, and I don't know, you can take this with a grain of salt with Marlon, he stated that he was actually the first choice to play Sundance, but he turned it down because of the extreme distress he had over the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. So,
wow,
fascinating stuff here, but George Roy Hill was very excited. What do you think about this, Steve?
So I think Steve McQueen would have been great as Sundance. He would have been absolutely fantastic. He would have nailed the part. And I cannot fucking imagine anybody other than Redford.
Yes,
you know, like
agreed.
what Redford does. And we talked about Steve McQueen in The Magnificent Seven. We talked about him in The Great Escape. He has that just palpable cool to him. He's obviously very physical. He obviously knows how to move. All that stuff is great. Redford's like a revelation in this movie. So I cannot think of anybody else playing that part. The Brando thing, I am certain that there is some truthiness in there. You know what I mean?
Maybe
he saw the property and some agent said, "Hey, maybe you might blank be interested in this." That happens all the time in Hollywood. But whether or not there was an actual offer or anything serious about him playing the part, who knows?
2 other people were offered the part. Jack Lemmon, who turned it down. He was the original choice. Then it was McQueen.
For Sundance or for Butch?
For Sundance. And
Jack Lemmon?
Yeah.
Okay.
And then Warren Beatty was the other one who was considered.
Yeah, of course.
At that time. Yeah.
Yeah.
And when you're looking at this time right now, and I'm not going to get too deep into Paul Newman just yet, but this is Paul Newman going on the run in the 60s, starting with The Hustler in 1961, through to HUD, through to Cool Hand Luke, and then this is 1969. So, Steve, you could argue that man ruled the decade of the 1960s, getting 4 Oscar nominations during that time for Best Actor.
Well, and this is the thing about Newman is, and we kind of said this about people like Tom Cruise, but Newman, maybe more than anybody else, is an actor in a movie star body. You know what I mean? Because Newman can fucking act. Just that list of like the darkness and pain of The Hustler compared to the joy of Butch, you know, and all those other parts, and Cool Hand Luke. And so he is obviously gorgeous. He's super cool, but he also has this ability to play real parts like that are really interesting. Like, totally, he's the decade of the 60s.
And here's the funny thing about Goldman when he was pitching this around the studio, before the studios bought this up, his original script, he had a hard time selling it because one studio would only buy it if he changed the ending so they didn't run to Bolivia. What were the reasons? The studio executive, he remembers telling him, John Wayne don't run, so cowboys shouldn't run. And so Goldman made some adjustments to the script. He didn't say what adjustments they were because they still run off to Bolivia. And then everyone apparently wanted the script after that. That's how this all kind of came together in the way that it did. And George Roy Hill, of course, had done a number of films leading up to this one, certainly was a great choice, I think, to direct this movie because of what he had done before with The World of Henry Orient and Hawaii, and even Thoroughly Modern Millie, because there's some weird sequences in the movie here with the bike riding, with Raindrops Keep Falling on My Head, that we're going to talk about a little bit. And of course, we just did that tribute to Robin Williams, Stephen. Both of us talked about The World According to Garp, and that is one of the final 3 films that George Roy Hill directed. So his final film being Funny Farm, and the less said about that Chevy Chase.
Oh my God.
The best. I don't know how he got roped into that, for God's sake. All right, Steve, are you ready to get into the movie?
I am ready to saddle up. I got my spurs. I got my 6-shooter. I am ready to go out. I'm just a little bit worried about the super posse.
Yes, you should be. Yippee-ki-yay. We shouldn't go that route. All right, let's get into the movie here. Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. The film opens with a 1905 newsreel in sepia tone profiling the hole-in-the-wall gang to the left of the screen. This is a fascinating decision to open the movie like this, Steve. The credits play on the right side, but we get This is silent, just the sound of an old school film. It's the one I use to open our show, our live shows, that sound of the newsreel footage playing. And then quietly and softly, Burt Bacharach's theme for the movie plays over this newsreel and over the credits that are appearing on the right in white against a black screen. So you, as a lover of film, what is your immediate feeling as you're watching this opening? We're getting introduced to Butch Cassidy and Sundance Kid through this newsreel, essentially previewing what we're going to see in the first 20 to 30 minutes of the movie. People getting shot off, them getting chased down, the train situation, and then escaping. So what are your thoughts as a director yourself choosing this way to open this movie?
Well, so this is what I mean about me never seeing the opening of the film for a long time. Because when I finally saw it, it's like, what the hell is this? This is it's so weird. And I will say, so my son has said he's into Westerns, so I forced him to watch this movie.
Yeah.
He was not pleased at this opening. He's like, is this a black and white movie? You said this wasn't black and white. I'm like, don't worry, it's going to become he's like, he was very impatient. And so what's funny is, so my experience of watching it this last time, I personally think it's brilliant.
Yes.
I absolutely love it. And I think in particular, it creates a meta quality for the film by saying this is kind of a film, and then, and later on we're going to see this is mostly based on truth or whatever the quote is like, we're not, it's very, but it's also, the pace is very slow. It's very somber when that music comes in. I loved it. My 13-year-old did not. He was not pleased with it at all.
Yeah, it's a fascinating array of images in this newsreel because we see, a bunch of cowboys come up on a hill. We see the card read, "The Hole in the Wall gang led by Butch Cassidy and Sundance Kid are all dead now, but once they ruled the West." But as you see this, when you train your mind when you watch enough of these silent films that you would hear some kind of score playing that is like matching the pace of the action, like that kind of stuff that you would normally hear. But the fact that George Roy Hill decides to remove any score that would be playing over it that would mirror the pace of the action, and instead play this almost melancholy, nostalgic, longing score that Burt Bacharach came up with here, I thought was such a genius move. And then to see the little things that they're preparing you for, because remember, this is a 1969 audience. How much of this newsreel footage have they really watched or seen? Butch Cassidy and Sundance Kid were not that well known as outlaws. I'm sure Jesse James is very well known. They weren't big characters in all the Western stuff in the 1950s that you saw on TV. They did appear, actors played them in certain serials, but they weren't big. So to introduce it this way, to kind of get people to understand that there's a history here of people knowing about these people, I thought was an interesting decision. And seeing how the bank robbery, seeing they kill people, seeing that that posse comes after him and kills a bunch of Butch and Cassidy and Sundance Kid's gang before they take off, I think is an interesting choice to start the movie, along with the credits playing distinctly on the right.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's fascinating.
I think one more thing before we go, and I know it's a lot to spend time on an opening, but I think it also, in a way, gets us prepared for what the movie is, which is on the left is the end of the Old West, on the right is the modernization. And so you see the difference in the two things that'll be a predominant theme throughout the whole movie. As Steve said, as the film goes away and we get just a black screen off to the right near the bottom, it just says, "Most of what follows is true." So, beginning. All right, we fade in from black on a window with bars on it. We're still in sepia tone. And as the window goes out of focus, we can see a man come into focus looking at the window from across the street. And that is Paul Newman with those baby blue eyes, who is playing Butch Cassidy in the movie. So, Steve, what an interesting introduction. Right off the bat, there he is looking at what we find out later is a bank window that is barred up. What are your thoughts as an introduction for Paul Newman as Butch Cassidy in this way?
Watching it this time, I went, oh, I didn't realize I was in the hands of a master filmmaker. You know what I mean?
Really?
Like that's what, because I've just always loved the movie and I hadn't studied the movie so much. And here I'm watching, it's like every single shot is a perfect, gorgeous, and completely its own thing shot as we're setting up him going into the bank and all the things that are going to happen. Right. And man, I'll just say it again. Paul Newman is easy on the eyes, man. It's a great intro to him.
But he walks out into the street, surveying a building as the city bustles around him, walks inside this building, and we see for the first time that it's a bank. And it's closing down for the day. Now, for those of us who live in a modern time, all of this feels very natural. But for Butch Cassidy, this, as you can tell by the look on his face and the way he's looking around, this all feels very foreign to him. We see that Butch notices that the bank has all these modern defenses against bank robberies. There's a button under the teller's desk that leads to an alarm bell that's there on the wall. There's a fortified safe. Latches and locks are very loudly locked, and there's even protection inside the windows in case you want to sneak through the bars on the outside of the windows from keeping you in.
What happened to the old bank? It was beautiful. People kept robbing it. Small price to pay for beauty.
This is what I mean about it being beautifully directed, is that you see it's shot, reverse shot. You see everything that Butch sees.
Yes.
And you were introduced at the beginning that this is a movie about the hole-in-the-wall gang who are criminals.
Yep.
And so now you see this guy and you see him see all the security as you described, and you go, I understand exactly what's happening. So that's the first thing. Beautifully done. Small price to pay for beauty. It's so damn funny. And this is the thing, man. I think Paul Newman had a whole career. He could have just been a comedic actor. He's so funny. Yes. He is so funny and charming in this movie. It is off the charts.
For those of you who don't know, a great comedy that he was in that is not your standard comedy. It's more like a humanist comedy, I guess. Nobody's Fool. One of the last great films he ever did. There's some great comedic moments that take advantage of Paul Newman's comedic ability that you all should watch. And it isn't slapstick humor type of comedy. Right. It is commenting on the world kind of comedy. And he does it so well. And I love this opening as well for him, because it's immediately, once again, right after we had that opening, once again, we're seeing an older cowboy, who is looking at the modernization of the West. Right. It is the end of the Old West, and he is trying to hold on by his fingernails, and you can see, and I think the sound design, which I think is another element of this that George Roy Hill deserves a lot of credit for, to turn the sound up so loud on the locking of things is to really shock the audience into this moment and realize, this is very clearly a locking him away from this stuff. And although he says, it's a small price to pay for beauty, he is the reason why they're doing this. So in a way, he is the reason why this is all changing and why he can't have his way anymore. So that scene ends and we cut to Robert Redford here, looking at his cards and playing the game of cards around a table with a few gentlemen. The camera stays squarely on him. Steve, it's something you just said a few seconds ago, a master filmmaker in a shot. The camera stays completely on Robert Redford for a majority of this scene in this one position. He is clearly winning.
Well, looks like you just about cleaned everybody out, fella. You haven't lost a hand since you got the deal.
And we can tell by the performance of this actor that this is dripping with sarcasm. And this is clearly an insinuation that Sundance is cheating.
What's the secret of your success?
Sundance quietly just says,
prayer.
Then the accuser says, let's just you and me play. And they play. And I think they're playing blackjack because he busts them. And when Sundance wins again, the guy now blatantly accuses him of cheating. And this causes the other players to leave the table.
The money stays and you go.
And for the first time in the scene, Steve, the camera cuts away from Sundance to a waist-high shot of the man, and we see that his hand is hanging there right by his gun and that he's ready to draw it. So what's your thoughts, Steve, on this intro of Robert Redford? After we just had the Paul Newman intro, we immediately intro Robert Redford here as a Sundance kid and these accusations of cheating.
So first of all, remember how I said that Paul Newman is just a beautiful man? Man, so is Redford. The boldness of the director to stay in, it's not even just, so lots of times like, okay, I'm going to sit in the master. We're just going to shoot a master. I'm not going to shoot coverage. I'm going to sit in the master. Then you see the whole scene.
Right.
Or you go like, I'm going to sit in a close-up. I'm going to just be on your face and we'll see that. Right. This is like an over the shoulder, over the hip. You know what I mean? It's an odd shot. And to sit in that shot, the confidence to go, no, we're just going to watch Redford this whole time.
Yeah.
Is fantastic. And the thing too, again, we're as the audience seeing a movie called Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, we know who's playing who. We're assuming this must be the Sundance Kid, and so we know that this guy's probably a badass, but the guy in the scene doesn't know it. And the pacing, the slow pacing is so great in the way they set it up.
Yeah, and people need to understand, this is a Robert Redford in 1969. He had been doing TV shows for the entire decade of the 1960s, but had rarely I don't think he'd gone into film with anything until 1967, really, with Barefoot in the Park. There was The Chase and This Property is Condemned and Inside Daisy Clover, but it was really Barefoot in the Park in 1967 that people start to take notice of Robert Redford. Then it's 2 years before he appears on screen again in anything. And the two things he appears in 1969 of note is Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid and a fantastic film called Downhill Racer about him being a skier, which is a Criterion Collection film that I need to buy, but it is one of these incredible performances from him showcasing what it's like to be a skier, which is a solo thing. And I think that's what's fascinating about Robert Redford. And George Roy Hill talked about this in the behind-the-scenes documentary as well. The character of Sundance fits the character of Robert Redford so well because he is kind of a distant guy. Paul is much more of a glad-hander, much more of a open, talkative person. Redford is much more of a thinker, much more of a quieter guy. And I agree with you, Steve, as Paul Newman is a good-looking guy who's a character actor in a leading man's body, I think the same thing of Robert Redford. And we see through the 70s how he challenges himself in numerous ways, playing some really interesting, complex characters as the 70s get going.
So here's the thing that's amazing to me about Redford is that people don't remember, and I don't know how many people have seen the film Barefoot in the Park with Jane Fonda.
Yeah,
he's great. Yes. And it's a really fun film. Robert Redford's claim to fame before Butch and Sundance was that he starred in Barefoot on the Park on Broadway, directed by Mike Nichols. And in Barefoot in the Park, this is the heyday of Neil Simon. This is one of the biggest shows on Broadway, won all sorts of awards. And which is why, by the way, when we did The Graduate, the initial idea of who to cast in The Graduate was Robert Redford, because Nichols had worked with him before. And so people perceived him as the romantic comedy guy.
Yeah.
That's who he was. And this is where that people who get pigeonholed into a certain kind of role is so sad, because it's Sundance so eclipses Barefoot in the Park of what Robert Redford can be, that people have totally forgotten about. And again, I'll say it, it's really funny. There are some things in it maybe that are dated, of course, but it's a classic good Neil Simon movie. But man, him coming into this role, the way I will say that he embodies the role of Sundance. You know what I mean? It's in every gesture, every look, every tilt of the head. You get who this guy is.
Yeah, and Steve, as a director, for an actor to keep your face still and not wanting to show every thought that's coming across your head across your brain is one of the most difficult things for an actor to do. To trust that them looking at a situation is enough is very, very hard for most actors to do. Yet it's exactly what most directors want them to do, I would imagine, Steve, in certain moments, because the camera's doing all the work. You just stay focused on exactly what you need to be focused on and stay in this mindset about what's happening. And you can see that clearly in Robert Redford. There's a confidence here in having the camera stay on him for that long through this whole process.
We said this, I think, when we did the very first Redford movie we ever did, I believe, which was The Natural.
Yes.
That there is something about Redford where he's always thinking, you can always see he's active. Yes. Even though when he's doing nothing.
Yes.
So he's just sitting there in this shot, and we're staying in it forever, just looking at his face, and you can feel the wheels are turning and his presence as an actor without him doing anything. So I agree 100% with you, and in particular as an editor. Yeah. And I will say this about when I've edited your performances is that, no, but this is true, is that there's some actors you can cut to. Because they're always in the scene and they're always solid and they're not doing too much.
Right.
Is that an actor, if the actor's moving their head a lot and doing a lot of things, I can't cut in the middle of a movement that's just kind of a technical thing.
Right.
Because you feel like you're cutting something off. But if the actor is just there and listening, I can always cut to that actor. And you were like that. And I had a couple of others that were like that, of like, I'm always going to be safe over it. Because sometimes you have to cut away from something that's shitty. And so you need somebody to cut to cover up the thing that you just cut away from. And I am 100% certain that I could always cut to Robert Redford. He will always be in the fucking scene and not be doing too much.
Yeah, if there's anything I would say to any actors who might be listening to us, the number one gift I got or lesson I ever got was listen to the other actor. Yep. Don't listen for your cue. Listen for the other actor. The cue will naturally happen if you've done your work. It's important to do that.
Well, we seem to be a little short on brotherly love around here.
Again, this is such an interesting decision by George Roy Hill to have Butch come in off frame, who we didn't even know was in the room or in this place.
If you're with him, you better get yourselves out of here. We're on our way. Come on, I wasn't cheating.
And he doesn't protest loudly. He doesn't make a scene. He says it very clearly and plainly.
I wasn't cheating. You can die. For that matter, you can both die. You hear that? If he invites us to stay, then we'll go. We're gonna leave anyway. He's got to invite us to stick around.
What's so interesting is that Butch and Sundance are not reacting to this the way you think that they should.
Yeah.
A dude is threatening this guy's life. He's standing over him. He's got his hand right next to his gun. Yeah. Obviously, there's no way that Sundance could survive in this situation, but that's not how Sundance is responding, and that's not how Butch is acting about it. They're acting about it like this isn't that big a deal. And the choice of have him ask us to stay and we'll go is the weirdest thing. It's like such a bizarre, and this is where the genius of William Goldman comes in, because that is just like a completely bizarre and unexpected line, but you kind of understand the logic, which is that Sundance wasn't cheating. Yeah. And so there's been a violation of the rules, and he just wants the guy to be polite to him, and then they can leave.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
I mean, this is what's great about watching the film now, all these years later. Because there's a run here, Steve, right, of a number of these revisionist Westerns, these neo-Westerns that are calling into question all the stuff that happened with Westerns. And in fact, when we get to the end of our discussion on this movie, this was a movie that was not received well by critics.
Right.
It got some very mixed reviews. Some very well-known reviewers, including Siskel and Ebert, did not like this movie and were very clear about not liking this movie. And one of the big reasons was because they felt some of the dialogue was anachronistic, some of the moments were anachronistic, and it didn't work. Yet, it did work because it is a classic film now in retrospect. When you look at all the Westerns that have come out, or that came out rather all around this time, McCabe and Mrs. Miller, all these other Westerns that really tried to shoot up, so to speak, the ideas of what a Western was, all the way leading us to Unforgiven, which I think is the greatest of these types of Westerns.
I think the anachronism of the film is critical to the film.
Yeah, agreed.
And it is a little, I mean, it's like, and you think now, like you think all the way to movies like A Knight's Tale or whatever, we're just like, we don't care, like, I mean, that it was funny, right before we started recording, you and I were talking about Braveheart.
Yes.
And that there's all sorts of things that aren't correct in Braveheart.
Right.
That's not or Gladiator is a perfect example of a movie which we're about to have a sequel of, which is not accurate in all sorts of ways.
Yeah.
Accuracy is great. It is not what we care about. And this movie is making a choice about the dialogue, and it is what makes these guys so lovable,
I agree. And also, we're going to get to the biographies for Butch Cassidy and Sundance, but the thing that was really well known about Butch, and they comment on it in the movie, is he didn't use his gun until they got to Bolivia.
Yeah.
Like this is what he was known for, was this charm of being able to be in a situation like this and navigate it. He was called affable by a lot of people in the description of him. And certainly what Paul Newman is doing here, I think, is really interesting to watch as an actor, the kind of relaxed performance that he's delivering, even in the moments where there's threat of his life in danger happening. He is very calm in these moments. And that's a fascinating approach. And Paul Newman says this in that behind the scenes documentary. There are certain characters that I hold on to tight, or I play them tight. Eddie Felson in Hustler, I played him tight. But Cool Hand Luke, I played him loose. Butch Cassidy, I played him loose. These are the characters that I understand how to let them go for a little bit and flow within a situation. And that you can tell that in the performance and the confidence of being able to do that and make it feel real in the scene,
What would you think about maybe asking us to stick around? What?
You don't have to mean it or anything. Just ask us to stick around. I promise you.
But the man pushes pushes Butch away. And then we see this like flash across Butch's face of being offended by what he did, but also being perplexed that someone would push him away. This is a fascinating look that Paul Newman delivers to this man in his steely blue eyes. Then he looks back at Sundance and says,
I can't help you, Sundance.
And now we see the man who has been threatening them. Now we see the face of this man in close-up, and there's a slight nervousness that creeps into his face as he starts to process what that word Sundance means to him, and that this might be the Sundance Kid. Now George Roy Hill moves the camera all the way back as if we're sitting at the bar all of a sudden, Steve. Full view of what's happening here. Sundance pushes the chair back as he gets up.
I didn't know you were the Sundance Kid when I said you were cheating. If I draw on you, you'll kill me. There's that possibility.
Butch, still trying to be the peacemaker, asks the man again to just ask them to stick around.
You can do it. I mean, easy. Come on.
I just stick around.
Thanks, but we gotta get going.
We've talked about this idea of show don't tell many times in the podcast.
Yeah.
And the when I first started learning, I was like, oh, we want to see things rather than have people just say things. That's not what it is at all. What it is that we want the audience actively figuring things out and understanding things in a deep and emotional way rather than just finding out information.
Yeah.
The fact that he says, I can't help you, Sundance, and everything in the room changes tells us everything we have to know about the Sundance Kid.
Yeah.
Because it's the reaction. When that guy reacts like that, he's like, oh, if I draw and you'll kill me. Well, now we know not only is he a great gunslinger, but he is such a great gunslinger that he is famous for being a great gunslinger. And even this guy who was supremely confident the moment before, I think this guy knows his way around a gun.
Yeah.
Knows that he is completely 100% outmatched. Yeah. That is such great writing, incredible exposition, and he does it in just one line.
So let me give you a little history on the Sundance Kid, right? We find out later what his actual name is, which we'll leave until that time. But he was born in Pennsylvania. He was the youngest of 5 kids and came out west when he was 15 years old to settle his cousin's estate in Colorado. He tried to do numerous straight jobs, for lack of a better term, had a hard time making it work. And then in Sundance, Wyoming, he stole a gun, a horse, and a saddle from a cowboy. He was caught, put in jail for 18 months, where he nicknamed himself the Sundance Kid. From there, he tried to go straight again, working jobs on ranches and in bars, but eventually joins Butch's gang and gets involved in this life of crime, robbing and what have you. But he was very well known across the West for being a ruthless killer when challenged and for using his gun to kill. And so this is what you just said, Stephen. The reason I brought up the history of Sundance for now is the intention that you're supposed to get from this scene is exactly what you said. And if you even haven't read one historical book about him, you know that this guy is dangerous and just the calmness that he has. And I think moving the camera back so that we see him in all his grandeur going toe to toe with this guy, facing him up, I think it was really smart to show that how dangerous this guy is and how scared this guy who was challenging was. And you're 100% right. Everything, the whole mood changes as soon as he does that, including with Butch. Then as Sundance walks out past the man and Butch is still gathering up the money in his hat, the man asks,
"Hey kid, how good are you?"
And almost as if waiting for the cue,
yes,
Butch jumps out of the way of the table. Sundance turns around just so quickly, shoots the man's gun belt off of him, and then shoots his gun away from him. And then Butch walks over to Sundance, and they both walk out with Butch making another over-the-hill joke. So, Steve, I know we talked about the scene already, but what do you think about the button on this scene and the way they did it? As you said, we were supposed to feel Sundance was a threat, but now we actually see him in action. So what do you think about as a director, following up the feeling that we know he's a threat to actually seeing it? Did we need to see that in order to end the scene?
Well, the answer is I needed to see it. And I will say this, and this is not an objective statement. This is an entirely subjective statement, but I'm going to tell you that The Sundance Kid is my favorite movie gunslinger, bar none. I just love the way Redford moves. I love the way they choreograph it. And it's funny because this isn't an action movie exactly. There's very little action in it. But every time Sundance draws a gun, it is cool as fuck. It really is.
Yeah. I mean, Doc Holliday might want a word with you, but I respect your Sundance Kid love.
Which one? Which Doc?
Well, yeah, it's a good point. Is it Val Kilmer? Is it Kirk Douglas? Or is it Dennis Quaid? There's so many. It's a great point. Or Jason Robards was one I just saw recently with James Garner.
Or that guy in Spectre of the Gun from Star Trek.
Oh, yes. Good suggestion. By the way, we're going to get some Star Trek references later in this conversation.
All right.
We cut to Butch and Sundance riding over some hills on their way to the hole in the wall place in Wyoming. And this is where the film, which had been in sepia tone for the entire beginning, all of a sudden moves to a natural color. And we see them riding through the mountains and trees and streams. Now, I normally don't ask you this question this quickly, but Steve, talk to me about, I know we just answered this button, but what do you think about them moving from sepia into color? Why choose it now? Why do it now? Why did they even open and keep everything in sepia until this moment?
Well, first of all, my son said he liked it better in The Wizard of Oz.
Fair point.
I love it. I mean, part of it is that I love the way the whole opening is shot. Between the scene in the bank and the scene with Redford, we're totally limiting the frame. Everything is in these close shots. We don't ever get out to see a master, to see a whole environment. We don't see the whole bank. We don't see the whole saloon. We see pieces of everything. And so it's not just that we go from sepia into color. It's that we go from all this close, confined stuff into the vastness of the West. So I think it's an incredible opening up of the movie. And I also think too, there's kind of a weird, I won't say it's a you're in or you're out thing, but this movie's going to move at its own pace.
Yes.
And it's going to have its own style, and it doesn't really relate to anything else. And I think it is a fascinating one. So I love it. I absolutely love it.
I also think it's a commentary on city versus nature.
Totally.
Like, city is confined, as you said, can be colorless. It can feel colorless. But when you go out into nature, there's so much more to see. And nature plays a big part in this movie, kind of subtly throughout the whole film.
What's your idea this time?
Bolivia?
Which Sundance doesn't know is a country.
What's Bolivia? Bolivia, that's a country, stupid.
Which is fine, because Butch doesn't even know where it is. Central or South America. And for anybody listening, it's in South America.
Look, if we'd been in business during the California gold rush, where would we have gone? California, right? All right. So when I say Bolivia, you just think California.
And here comes one of the classic lines from the movie.
You just keep thinking, Butch. That's what you're good at.
Boy, I got vision and the rest of the world wears bifocals.
It's so fun. I mean, this is the thing. I love these two guys.
Yeah.
I would watch
100%.
If you just said like, hey, we're just going to have a TV show where we just watch Butch and Sundance, played by Paul Newman and Robert Redford, just chatting, I'd be like, yeah, I'm in. I'm done. I'm great about this. I love it.
What's also great is this is the first time these two actors have ever met, was doing this film.
Wow.
Yet there's such an easy chemistry between them. And I think I didn't mention earlier when we were talking to Steve McQueen, yes, he would have been fine. Yeah. But this is Steve McQueen in 1969. Remember the hell he put Yul Brynner through in Magnificent Seven? He'd have put Paul Newman through the same hell, because Paul Newman was just as established as Yul in when he did Magnificent Seven. And I think there would have been a one-upsmanship that might have sank the movie.
Well, Andy was a massive pain in the ass in Great Escape. He just brought in his own writers, wouldn't show up to set if he wasn't happy with the script that day. Like, he was a pain in the ass, you know?
Well, Paul Newman says that, Robert showed up. He loved showing up 10 to 15 minutes late to set, which always bothered him, but he delivered such a great performance that he did it in the end. So, yeah, everyone's got their things for sure. But I really love this line. You just keep thinking, Butch. That's what you're good at. And
is Butch good at thinking?
I think he is good at thinking, but he may not always be good at ending up at the place he needs to end up in while he's thinking, but he certainly has ideas.
I think he is a great thinker, but he's very blind to some of the stuff he doesn't know. What might be a problem that over and over again in this movie, there are things where he is a good thinker, but he hasn't maybe thought the whole thing through perfectly.
Well, I think that's the ironic part of him saying the rest of the world needs bifocals or wears bifocals, because he could use bifocals to see things a little bit more clear close up, because he's got such a great idea of the big picture. The details seem to escape him in certain moments, for sure. As they get close, Butch sees News Carver, one of his gang, and asks him what he's doing, as it looks like he's saddling up his horse. And News Carver says, "Oh, I'm not doing anything, Butch." And he's like, "Well, no, you're doing something. No, you're doing something." And so let's take a moment here to talk about this. News Carver is played by Timothy Scott, who would later be known as Tim Scott. He is the co-founder of the New Met Theater in L.A., along with James Gammon, who was the manager in Major League, Majalou Brown. But you might also recognize Tim from other films like Days of Heaven, Fried Green Tomatoes, The Electric Horseman in Gettysburg, or any of the number of TV shows that he was in from the 60s until his untimely death at 57 in 1995.
Wow.
But I know him best, and maybe some of you 80s kids, and maybe you do too, Steve, if you remember, he plays Andy Bemis in Footloose, the guy who gives them his place to hold the dance in and tells Lithgow and Diane Wiest when they're out there watching the dance from afar near the end of the movie, "You did a good thing here, preacher. You did a good thing." So I will always had a soft spot for that guy. So to know that this is the same guy, same actor, really surprised me. Now, News Carver is a real person. His nickname was News, and it was given to him because, as we see later in just a few minutes, he enjoyed seeing his name in the newspaper with stories of the gang's exploits. He was ambushed and killed by Sheriff E.S. Bryant and his deputies in 1901 at Jack Owen's Bakery. Oh, it's a shame to go die in a bakery in Sonora, Texas. So he was a real guy, and that really did happen. Anyway, News says he's doing nothing, as I said. When Butch calls him out for doing something, News looks to his left, and a large 6'9" man walks out of a log cabin. This is Harvey Logan, who is played by Lurch himself, Ted Cassidy. What an introduction to have a man bend down to walk out of a log cabin. What is your impressions when you see Harvey Logan walk out?
Ted Cassidy is a vastly underrated actor, I think, because he's obviously Lurch. He's also in Star Trek. You probably have that in your list of stuff.
I do. Yes.
In What Are Little Girls Made Of? But he also plays the voice. I'm just going to go on the Star Trek thing because he plays the voice of the captain of the Thesaurus in the Corbomite Maneuver.
Yeah, Balak. Yeah,
Balak. And the thing is, if you watch him, particularly both as Lurch, but then you watch him in What Are Little Girls Made Of? He's a damn fine actor, really an interesting actor. And I think this is this weird thing of like, well, you're a giant, so you don't actually really have a lot of opportunity to be a damn fine actor, which he is,
right?
You know, and I think he's fantastic in this scene. And oh my God, that entrance coming out of that hut is like crazy.
It's in the way it's framed, you know, as a director, Steve, you watch this, him coming out of the right side of the screen. He's not coming out like far away. We're seeing him walk out to the right of our screen and come in the biggest way possible to show you the size of this man compared to Butch. So to immediately give you the feeling that Butch is outmatched in whatever is going to happen here. And just to give a little more love to Ted Cassidy, because I was so surprised to find out this stuff about him. Also in the Addams Family, when you see Thing, the hand wandering around, that is Ted Cassidy's hand. He played Thing as well. He was also the voice of the Gorn in Arena in Star Trek as well. And he played Isaiah in Gene Roddenberry's post-apocalyptic dramas Genesis 2 and Planet Earth. He narrates the opening for the TV series The Incredible Hulk. I went my entire life not knowing that was Ted Cassidy, Steve.
Bruce that whole thing? Oh my God, I never knew that. That's awesome.
It's Ted Cassidy. But here's a crazier thing. When he was first starting out, he was a staff announcer for WFAA radio in Dallas. Prior to his acting career, he was part of WFAA's coverage of the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. He was among the first people to interview assassination eyewitnesses, W.E. Newman Jr. and Gail Newman. And sadly, he passed away at the age of 46 in 1979 due to complications from open heart surgery.
Wow.
But certainly he had, I didn't look up the disease, but he had the disease that made him 6'9" and caused the low voice and what have you. So it's fascinating.
Yeah.
The character he's playing, I do want to go, the person he's playing, Harvey Logan, because this is like one of the last times we see him. He's more commonly known in the Old West as Kid Curry, and he was considered one of the wildest of the wild bunch. He had a reputation for killing. He killed at least 9 law enforcement officers in 5 shootings and another 2 men in other instances. He was one of the most dangerous outlaws of that time. He took his own life years later after he was shot by a posse after stealing horses. And the Mythbusters did a sequence based on his claim that Curry could drop a silver dollar off of his hand and draw his gun and fire 5 shots into the silver dollar before it hit the ground. You won't be surprised to find out that they found the claim to be highly unlikely. But yeah, you're not going to get a chance to see Kid Curry killing people, shooting people. So how do you display the ferocity of the wildest of the wild bunch? You cast a 6'9" man who walks out and challenges Butch. So it was a smart move, I thought, by William Goldman and George Roy Hill to play it this way.
One of the things I love about the way this is set up is just watch Redford as they coming into the camp. Every little detail, because he's not talking. Butch is doing all the talking.
Yeah,
you can see the Sundance Kid observing all of the just like Butch was observing every single detail as he went into the bank. Now we have the Sundance Kid going, something's up. There's a threat here, and you can see him analyzing it the whole time.
Yeah, was a question you asked me just a few minutes ago. I think Butch is the thinker. I think Sundance is the smarter one.
Well, yeah, and Sundance has no interest in being smart. You know what I mean?
Yes, he's
like Sundance doesn't read the paper. Sundance doesn't when they go to Bolivia. Sundance never bothers to learn Spanish. It's like, but he is a genuinely smart person.
Yeah,
in his way. Yeah.
Yes. So maybe he's street smart. While Butch is more worldly.
Just fixed and robbed Union Pacific Flyer, Butch. That's all we had in mind.
You fellas got everything I told you all wrong. Sure, we might hit the flyer. But even if we do, it won't be this run. It'll be the next one, the return.
We see quick shots of the gang as they seem to be moving closer. This is such a smart move by the editor. Without seeing them move into a circle around Butch, the quick shots make it feel like they are moving closer to surround them, in essence. And Butch continues and says, now Sundance and I have been checking the banks. And then Harvey Logan, Ted Cassidy, with his very deep voice says,
No banks.
Yeah, no banks. I should have let you say that. I know you want to say those. Butch protests that banks are better than trains. Now, this is a fascinating acting situation here because Butch is acting as Paul Newman is acting as well.
When I left, I gave orders.
New orders been given.
Well, I run things here, Harvey.
Used to you did. Me now.
And this is an interesting point you just brought up, Steve, because I was going to bring this up, so I like that you said this. Harvey looks at Sundance and says,
this don't concern you.
Really strongly, as if to say to him, don't pull your gun. I know what you can do. And it almost feels like in that moment, by separating him out from Butch, Sundance was never really, from this iteration, Sundance wasn't part of the gang. He is Butch's friend, so he's in the gang, but he's not necessarily part of the gang. And I found that to be a fascinating way to read that as you're watching this exchange. What do you think about it?
No, it's very clear that Butch and Sundance are friends in the way that none of this gang is friends with either of them.
Right.
And I also think, that moment of this doesn't concern you is it's reinforcing just what a badass the Sundance Kid is.
Yes.
Because the feeling is like if Sundance wanted to get involved, he'd wipe out the whole hole in the wall gang. You know what I mean? Like everyone's dead if he actually gets involved. And I also think it's pointing to an idea of that there's some code of honor that they've established that I think Harvey says next of like, you always said someone can challenge someone and that there's a code of honor that nobody can interfere with that challenge,
Right.
So Sundance is not supposed to interfere in what's happening right now.
Right.
You tell him to stay out.
Well, he goes his own way like always.
Okay, Steve, what are we leading up to here? And how do you think George Roy Hill is doing building up the tension?
I think we knew the minute that we got into the hole in the wall camp that there was going to be a confrontation and that there was a competition. And we know that that Harvey has challenged Butch's authority. So I think we're like, I think we'll have there'll be a gunfight or there'll be there's going to be the classic Western showdown in some way is about to happen.
I think what's crazy about this scene is there's so much comedy in the scene.
Oh, yeah.
Even though it's very dramatic.
Okay, so we just forget about Logan taking over, okay, Flatnose?
You always said that any one of us could challenge you, Butch.
And then Butch without missing a beat. Great performance here by Paul Newman.
Well, that's because I figured no one would do it.
Now, real quick, I'm not to go too deep into Flatnose, but Flatnose Curry in real life was Harvey Logan's mentor. So the guy we're seeing here who is challenging him, and they rob banks together. Clearly, that's not the relationship here.
So that's why it's Kid Curry.
Yes, right,
Because
exactly. Because he took Flatnose Curry's name because he was his mentor, and so which is things did back in the Old West. So it's interesting.
You guys can't want Logan.
To which News Carver replies, like a son whose dad hasn't been there often enough in his life and maybe wants a new dad, a stepdad, says,
Well, at least he's with us, Butch. You've been spending a lot of time gone.
Again, the comedy within the drama here, Steve, is so deftly well written by William Goldman.
Guns or knives?
Neither?
Pick.
I don't want to shoot with you, Harvey.
Anything you say, Butch.
And then whips out a Crocodile Dundee-sized knife
Totally.
out of his back pocket that even slightly unsettles Sundance. So for the first time, Steve, we get a shot of Sundance being just a little bit like, oh, shit. Butch looks around dejectedly at his gang like he's a wounded, hurt person, walks over to Sundance.
Way to make a profit in this. Bet on Logan.
I would, but who'd bet on you?
Which I thought was hilarious. And then Harvey tried to maybe make some peace ahead of time, tells Sundance he can stay once Butch is dead.
Listen, I don't mean to be a sore loser, but when it's done, if I'm dead, kill him.
Love to.
And then waves at Harvey with a fake smile.
It's so great because they're such, again, it's the charisma, it's the chemistry between the two of them. And it's so unexpected the way that they are behaving and what they're saying, you just love them.
I meant to ask you this. I'm going to say this. I meant to ask you this earlier. I want to ask you this now because now we've seen, in essence, 2 bits with Butch Cassidy and Sundance Kid. Have they played this act before? Have they done this stuff before? What they did at the card table with that guy and what they're doing here with Harvey Logan. Have they faced someone who was who looked maybe like he had them and they play this game messing with everything around them? Is this something they do, or do you think they're just coming up with this on the fly and just relying on their friendship and chemistry?
It's a great question, and my answer to you is to some degree, yes. Here's what I think. I think they have played games like this before over and over and over again.
Yeah.
And like a good duet, like a pair that has been musicians together or maybe do a podcast together, they start to know each other's moves. And so they can see, oh, I know where you're going with this. They don't know exactly maybe what's going to happen because there's a little element of improv, but I think they definitely know, like, he gives him the out by saying his name at the blackjack game.
That's the moment.
And that's what makes this work. And I think there's definitely a moment where Sundance realizes, I think Butch has a plan. He might not know exactly what the plan is, but he's ready. And they're really, really good at playing off each other.
I think the second he tells him to bet on Logan is the moment that Sundance knows there's a plan in place.
Yeah.
All right. So let's get this on. Harvey takes off his shirt, and we see Ted Cassidy in all his intimidating and scary and well-muscled glory, and gets in his knife-fighting stance.
No, not yet. Not until me and Harvey get the rules straightened out.
Rules? In a knife fight? No rules.
Which causes him to get out of his stance and move his knife to his side. Butch walks up, who had not broken pace up to this point, and squarely kicks him in the nuts.
What?
Well, if there ain't gonna be any rules, let's get the fight started. Someone count 1, 2, 3, go.
1, 2, 3, go.
Butch then hits Harvey with a double fist wallop to the face, knocks him out, and just like that, the fight is over. And to put a button on this moment, Flatnose Curry walks up and says,
I was really rooting for you, Butch.
Well, thank you, Flatnose. That's what sustained me in my time of trouble.
It's so fun. And I had this thought. This had never occurred to me until watching this last time, as I suddenly went, wait a minute. Does Indiana Jones shoot the guy with the sword if this moment doesn't exist in Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid?
Oh my God, great point.
Because it's a similar thing where it's like, we're having this build, we're going to have this great fight, this great confrontation, and then our main character just cheats in the best way, and it is awesome. And to me, they're totally linked forever now.
I agree with you. Two good-looking leading men who love to play against type. Harrison loves to play against type, especially in certain moments. The I love you, I know was improv.
Right.
So, yeah, that makes total sense. That's actually a really great point.
Hey, what's this about the flyer?
And this is the greatest second button on a scene, one of the greatest. When News Carver tells him that Harvey wanted to hit the flyer on this run and then the return run, which nobody had ever done before or would think to do that because they'd get more money this way, Butch is clearly impressed.
Harvey thought of that?
Yes, sir, he did.
Well, I'll tell you something, fellas. That's exactly what we're going to do.
Oh, Steve, in the end, this was a useless fight because in the end, he's going to do what Harvey suggested, but he needed to reaffirm his leadership of the group. What are your thoughts on that?
My thought is that Butch Cassidy's superpower is his likability.
Yes.
Is that he's walked into a situation where he should get killed. His authority is being challenged. And in any other movie, the macho-ness would come up, and there would be the men who have to face off in their manliness. Butch never does any of that. Yeah. And then he has no ego about taking Harvey's idea. He's just like, well, that's a good idea. Let's do that.
Yeah.
I don't even think he's angry at Harvey in a weird way. You know what I mean?
As he says later in the film, and as long as they come out ahead, that's all he cares about.
That's all he cares about. John, I have a question for you.
Oh, yes, please.
And it comes from arguably the greatest cinephile short questioner of all time, Paul Sevilla, who asks, is this film the first buddy comedy?
That is a great question. No, because you have the Bob Hope, Bing Crosby movies, The Road to This, The Road to That. So I don't, and then you have Martin and Lewis before you have Butch Cassidy and Sundance Kid. There were a number of movies with those two guys.
I think if we move it towards buddy action comedy, then maybe yes. But yeah, those are the ones that popped up to me as well. And but here's one thing I want to say about it too. Yeah. Which is what's weird about this movie. There's a lot of things weird about this movie.
Oh, yeah.
And we just did, it's funny, we just did MASH, where I said, this movie disproves every theory I have and system of making films because there's no ongoing story, there's no ongoing conflict, it's entirely episodic. Like there's not things that we're worried about, throughout the whole film.
Yeah.
This is also an entirely episodic film. There are things that we're worried about, but not in the same way. We have the super posse is in the middle set piece of something we obviously are worried about.
Yeah.
But the other thing about it is that the basic structure of the buddy movie is that we start off hating each other, overcome our differences, work together, and then form a lasting bond. That's Lethal Weapon. That's Running Scared. That's buddy comedy. And it also is the same structure of romantic comedy. Yeah. That's not here. There is no moment. I mean, there are moments where they bicker.
Yeah.
But there's almost zero conflict between Butch and Sundance through the whole movie.
Yeah.
As opposed to Lethal Weapon where they want to kill each other,
Well, yeah, exactly. And the thing is, Sundance Kid has his bullets. It has his gun. Butch Cassidy, his bullets are his words.
Yep.
And he shoots his way out of any situation without using his gun with his words, and I think that's a great thing. And I want to, and this seems like a perfect time to bring up Butch Cassidy, who was really Robert Leroy Parker, who we'll find out a little bit later in the film. Parker was born into a large Mormon family in Beaver, Utah. He briefly dabbled in ranching and horse racing, then turned to bank and train robberies. In 1894, he was arrested and sentenced to 2 years in prison, of which he served 18 months in the state prison in Laramie, Wyoming. Both Butch and Sundance only ever served a total of 18 months each in one stint in prison in Wyoming. Sometime after his release, Parker forms the Wild Bunch. That's what they originally were known as. And that name was already being used by Sam Peckinpah, which is why they didn't use it as the name in this movie, with a group of outlaws who at times included Will Carver, Ben Kilpatrick, Harvey Logan, Elsie Lay, and of course the Sundance Kid. The gang robbed trains as well as banks. Union Pacific Railroad Chairman E.H. Harriman, who we're about to discover, made an attempt to negotiate with Parker about the robberies, but nothing came of it. And in 1901, as we know what happens there towards the end of the movie. So he was the oldest of 13 kids. So the idea of leading a gang, Steve, makes all the sense in the world. Sundance Kid being the baby of his crew of 5 people out of Pennsylvania, the kids there, makes sense that he would gravitate to a semi-father figure or an older brother there in Sundance or in Butch Cassidy. So I think their natural life essences worked in that way.
So I actually have a Butch Cassidy story for you.
Please.
Which this comes from William Goldman. William Goldman said that there were 2 scenes that he absolutely had to have in the movie from history. Really? And actually only one of them made it into the film.
Oh, wow.
One of them, the one that made it into the film, is the ending, is the shootout in Bolivia. That, of course, had to be in the film, and he fought for that many times. Yeah. The other scene was about what you mentioned, which is when Butch Cassidy was in prison in Wyoming, which is that he's in prison in Wyoming, and I think Goldman said it was the governor. Maybe it was the
governor who pardoned him. Yes.
Yes. Okay. So do you know the story about the governor pardoning him?
No. In fact, I when I stumbled upon it, I was like, why would a governor pardon this guy?
Well, check out this story. So this is what William Goldman wanted to put in the movie, is that the governor comes to Butch, who is so likable. Everybody liked him. Every single person that met him just loved Butch Cassidy. And the governor is like, look, Butch, I will pardon you if you just promise to go straight. And Butch Cassidy said, Governor, I'm sorry, I can't promise that. And he said, well, I'm offering you your freedom. Like, all you have to do is say that you're going to go straight and I will pardon you. And he says, look, I can't promise that. And he says, but I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I will promise to never commit another crime in the state of Wyoming. And the governor went, that's good enough for me. And Butch Cassidy never committed another crime in the state of Wyoming.
Wow.
Yeah. Wow. And Goldman this whole time is going, I have to put this in the movie. It perfectly establishes the character of who this guy is.
Yeah.
But he kept going like, well, in order to have that scene, I have to show Butch in prison. Yeah. I have to show him being affable in prison and why the governor. And so it ended up being like 20 pages to get to that scene. And it just wasn't a part of the movie. And it's not the studio didn't make him cut it out. Nobody else made him cut it out. And I've had this happen. This is Kill Your Darlings. I've had this happen a ton of times where it's like, it's got to go. And so it's not in the movie.
Wow. But just to wrap up the story on Butch Cassidy, how he got his name, because we know how the Sundance Kid got his name. He named himself. But with Butch Cassidy, he turned into the crime life kind of early because he worked on several ranches and he met a cattle thief named Mike Cassidy who mentored him on the criminal life. And it was during one of his stints trying to apprentice a number of different jobs. He was an apprentice to a butcher, and that's how he got his name, Butch Cassidy, overall, because he took the name of the mentor and then also being a apprentice to a butcher. So that's how he got his name. So it's an interesting way how these people come up with their names, Steve, in the Old West.
That's right, Outlaw.
Yeah, right. Wait a minute. We cut to the black smoke of a train approaching. And we see Sundance jump on top of the train and make his way to the engineers, get them to stop the train right where Butch and the gang are waiting and waving at the engineers. The engineer is excited that they're getting robbed by Butch Cassidy's gang. And when the engineer drops down behind Sundance, one of the gang pulls a gun on him. Sundance turns around with a gun ready to kill. By the way, if you notice this moment, this shows you Sundance as well, how lethal he can be. Because when he swings around, he is perfectly in a position to kill somebody. And the engineer, who maybe is glimpsing the end of his life, says,
"But just thought I'd watch."
Bring the kids with her.
We see Butch trying to negotiate with a guy behind the door guarding the money.
I can't do that. On account of I work for Mr. E.H. Harriman of the Union Pacific Railroad.
Will you shut up about that E.H. Harriman stuff and open the door?
What's going on?
You got a patriot in there. Okay, go ahead, News.
That's young Woodcock. He's awful dedicated.
Woodcock, it's like he is the perfect embodiment of the establishment, of the lower level people toadying to the important people in the establishment. Yeah. Which is why this is such a perfect 1969 moment, you know?
I agree. Yeah. And it's such a perfect choice too. This is played by George Firth, who is a great character actor. You've seen him in films like Blazing Saddles, The Man with Two Brains. We covered Oh God. We saw him in Oh God, a film we did. Oh, right. Cannonball Run and Bulworth. Now, what I did not know, and I can't believe I didn't know this until I started doing research for the film, is that he wrote the 11 one-act plays that would be combined by a certain Stephen Sondheim and Hal Prince and himself to be the book for the musical Company.
Whoa.
I had no effing idea, and that is one of my favorite musicals, bar none. He also collaborated with Sondheim on 2 more musicals, Merrily We Roll Along, which has been rewritten over the years and is now in its most recent revival, starring the great Jonathan Groff, who people know from Mindhunter and people know from Hamilton, who played King George. It won 4 Tonys at the most recent Tonys, and there's a film adaptation of it in development. He also wrote the not-so-great Getting Away with Murder, which is one of those kind of forgotten Sondheim ones. But he graduated from Northwestern and got a graduate degree in writing from Columbia University. This is an incredibly intelligent man who would go on to write some fascinating musicals playing this role, and he plays it so well, Steve, because he is that guy who's like, I'm committed to my job, and I know you want me to do these things, but there's a bravery to it almost to what he's doing, Steve, right?
No, there is. No, he is genuinely brave. And can I tell you something interesting? I don't think I haven't told you any of this, is that you know that I went to New York a couple of months ago, saw a couple of Broadway shows. The most important one for me to see was Merrily We Roll Along. It is absolutely fantastic.
Yeah.
Karen directed Merrily when we were in college.
Oh, wow.
So the first time I saw it was in a production that Karen directed. It's the production, because a lot of Sondheim is a little bit, doesn't always work perfectly. And Merrily was a show that didn't work perfectly.
Yes.
And they solved a lot of the problems. And I'll tell you, Daniel Radcliffe has a song in there. It's one of the greatest performances I've ever seen on Broadway. And Jonathan Groff is a fucking revelation. Because what the thing about Merrily, I don't know how well you know that show, but it goes backwards. So it starts with the end of the story where they're in their 40s and goes back to them in like college.
Yeah.
And Jonathan Groff's transformation is incredible. And in addition to that, last week, Karen and I went to see Company, which is currently playing at the Pantages, where the gender is reversed. So it's a female lead named Bobby.
Yep.
It's so funny. I'll just say, I know we're in a very long conversation of Butch Cassidy, but I'm going to say this anyway, which is that I think Company has the highest ratio of fantastic songs in a show that does not actually work for me.
What? It doesn't work for you, that show?
No.
Oh,
no,
my God.
The show doesn't. It was so slow. I mean, like, between Not Getting Married, Ladies Who Lunch, Being Alive, like, there's so many songs in that are complete, in my son's word, bangers.
I love that musical. Yeah. I want to propose to you now. Maybe we'll get to it at some point in the next couple of years, but we rarely do documentaries on the show. I would love to do that Company documentary.
I haven't
You've never seen it?
No.
It's so good.
I've seen clips from it.
Criterion Collection documentary. That tells me even more how great that documentary is. Great Dean Jones as Bobby.
You know who we are.
You're the hole-in-the-wall gang, Mr. Cassidy. I understand that. But you got to understand Mr. E.H. Harriman himself of the Union Pacific Railroad give me this job. And I got to do my best, don't you see?
Your best don't include getting yourself killed.
And by this time, we now see that News has been rigging the railroad car with explosives to blow it open. And as Woodcock, who senses that the explosion is coming, I don't know how he senses this, goes and hides behind some boxes, protesting about E.H. Harriman until the dynamite goes off. This is a massive explosion, Steve.
Yep.
It's not as big as the dynamite explosion we're going to get a little bit later, but it's a pretty big explosion. And as the gang jumps in there, Butch immediately goes for Woodcock, who is injured, still alive. He checks on him, makes sure he's okay. As the gang opens the safe door with another mini explosive, News tells him,
There ain't what I'd call a fortune in there, Butch.
Well, so we come out ahead. That's the main thing.
So, Steve, thoughts on this train robbing scene and the way they portray Butch and Sundance here? Because we see Sundance. There's no jokes with Sundance. This is serious business robbing the train. But we see this extended scene with Butch now negotiating with Woodcock and then checking on Woodcock to make sure he's okay afterwards. So after the explosion, your thoughts on it?
Particularly because this year we did the season of Scorsese.
Yes.
We spent a lot of time with bad guys and talking about, and obviously, you know, I'm continually wrestling with the morality of Goodfellas or of Wolf of Wall Street or of Raging Bull and thinking about, like, You know, we have to keep reminding ourselves that these are really, really bad guys.
Yeah.
Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid are also bad guys.
Yes.
They are the nicest bad guys in maybe all of film.
Well,
I think Butch genuinely cares about Woodcock and his injury. He really doesn't want to hurt anybody.
Yeah.
I don't think Sundance in history was a stone cold killer.
Yes,
but this Sundance, he doesn't want to kill anybody. You know?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, these are really, really nice criminals.
He doesn't want to, but he's ready at any moment to. And I think that comes through for sure. Yeah, I hear your point for sure. Nice criminal. I like the way you say that. Nice criminal. Now we cut to a marshal at night speaking to the townsfolk about getting Butch and Sundance and their gang, and that they robbed the train that was the one that was here closest to them, and so they need to get together. And this marshal is played by the great Kenneth Mars, who you all might remember from a film we did on the show, Steve, Young Frankenstein. He is Inspector Kemp. He was also in a number of other movies and TV shows, but later in life found a second career as a voiceover artist. He is the voice of King Triton in the original Little Mermaid from 1989, and the voice of Grandpa Longneck in the Land Before Time series, and along with numerous other characters that he was a part of. So, fantastic actor here. But this is not going well, as none of the townsfolk want to go on this ride. And as it goes back and forth with the townsfolk, George Roy Hill's camera pans across the street. We see a general store, then we move up to a second floor, and this is a brothel where Butch and Sundance, who the marshal is trying to get people together to go after, are watching the marshal flail around here, to which Butch says with a big smile on his face, "Boy, I could eat this up with a spoon."
It's so fun. And it's so funny because Magnificent Seven is like 1960. So this is 9 years later. This is not that far.
No.
And Magnificent Seven is still the Old West, you know?
Yes. Right.
And then we've gone through the spaghetti westerns, and now we're at Butch and Sundance. And this is just complete. We see them forming the posse. We're obviously going to go chase Butch and Sundance, who are obviously in the hills somewhere. Right? No. That's not what's happening at all. They're just hanging out, having a beer, literally directly above the people that are supposed to be hunting them. It's great.
I think that's the great thing of this, is that like you're watching them commentating and kind of laughing at, again, the comedy, right? Within a serious situation. The comedy within a series, I think, is just so smartly peppered throughout the whole movie. We just had the Woodcock back and forth. But now we see them watching this marshal. He wants to get all these people together, you know, and I kind of love that. The lady of the brothel comes in there to Butch and Sundance and tells them about the party for her piano player that is heading off to war.
What war?
The war with the Spanish.
Remember the Maine. Who can forget it?
You provide the prose poems, I'll provide the war.
Exactly. Citizen Kate.
You know, when I was a kid, I always thought I was going to grow up to be a hero.
Well, it's too late now.
And then Butch gets, they both have been drinking quite a lot of beer, gets legitimately upset and asks him,
What'd you say something like that for? You didn't have to say something like that.
And then Butch pitches Sundance on going off to fight the war. They could be majors. And that's when we hear them reveal their actual names to each other.
Parker. Yeah, that's my real name. Robert Leroy Parker. No fooling? No. Mine's Longbaugh. No fool. Long what? Terry Longbaugh. So you'd be Major Longbaugh. What do you say?
You just keep thinking, Butch. That's what you're good at.
I have maybe this is the weirdest question I've ever asked on the history of the Cine-Files. So we're in a brothel.
Yes.
I'm making no comment about actual prostitution or anything like that.
Right.
But here is my question for you.
Not shaming your kink. Go ahead, yes.
Just not getting into that in any way.
No.
Are Old West prostitutes, as portrayed in film, the best prostitutes?
Hey.
I think like this world, because the way the world is always portrayed is these very friendly ladies who aren't unhappy about as opposed to like in Les Mis.
I think this is a great question. Okay. It's a fun question. Well, I mean, if you go by 1992's Unforgiven, I think that's the more accurate portrayal of prostitutes, right? But of course, within this construct of the film, they have to be this kind of jovial, okay with the job that they're doing. But I imagine it was a pretty horrific existence to be a prostitute in the Old West. Because ain't that many showers in the Old West.
It's
true. There's a
true.
lot of stank dudes rolling up on your body. But I think I agree with you. Yes, yes. Now we head back to the marshal, who is still trying to get these people on his side.
Well, what do you say?
Out of nowhere, a bike salesman walks up.
I say, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, friends and enemies, meet the future.
And then introduces the future mode of transportation in this weary Western world. Steve, it's such an insane moment because it once again shows how the Old West is dying and this new mode of transportation, this new way of existence is coming very quickly. And it's almost like it's a commercial in the middle of the speech, almost like a pop-up commercial on YouTube in the middle of a video that you're watching. It's so absolutely random. And the marshal is upset about this, but the bike salesman says, you did half the job by getting these people together. And just let me have my presentation. What are your thoughts on this?
It's so bizarre because what's so funny is that because it's also a setup. It's like the reason that we have this scene is so we can have a later scene that makes no sense in the movie. Do you know what I mean? like we're because normally when you're going to do some heavy lifting to get a setup so you can introduce the gun or the poison or the whatever the thing is you have to introduce later on.
Yeah,
it's because that thing is critical and important. Yeah. This is not critical and important. And yet it is also one of the most joyful things that happen in the whole film. It is an amazing, absolutely amazing sequence that is set up by this. Yeah. But in terms of character or conflict or, the story, it is completely unnecessary. Yeah. And it is weird and bizarre here, and it is weird and bizarre later. And I'm totally signed up for both of them.
And I also think it's, again, breaking down the convention. It's a film that zigs where you think it's going to zag. This idea of this dude stepping up is almost like a Music Man, right? The pool rhymes with P, and this whole thing. It looks like he's doing this whole pitch. Like I think of The Simpsons and trying to sell the tram or the railroad there.
Monorail.
The monorail, that's it. So the monorail, that's what it feels like to me, that he's stepping up as like Troy McClure to try to sell the monorail, which I think is hilarious. But again, under just kind of reminding you as an audience, the Old West is dying. Modernization is coming, and this is they're barely holding on to the end.
I think I'll get saddled up and go looking for a woman.
Good hunting.
Shouldn't take more than a couple of days. I'm not picky.
As he lists all the characteristics that this woman needs to have in order to get Butch, in order to get Sundance to be her lover. Then we cut to a young woman walking into her house, lighting the lanterns and beginning to disrobe. And this is Katherine Ross of Graduate fame, which we spoke about when we did The Graduate. She is playing Etta Place, who is the great love interest of Harry Longaball, the Sundance Kid. Now, William Goldman said in pre-production for the film, and George Roy Hill as well, that there was almost nothing known about Etta Place. They turned her into a school teacher, but most likely she was a prostitute. That George Roy Hill felt that she was a prostitute, but William Goldman wrote the script, so he deferred to him turning her into a school teacher. But this is a fascinating character in the history of the West because almost nothing is known about her, almost nothing endured, yet a lot of rumors say that she survived both Butch and Sundance and found her place there in South America or came back to America and reestablished herself in her own way. She goes into her bedroom, and just as she's about to expose her entire body by taking off the rest of the clothes, she's shocked by the appearance of Sundance. Now, the first time you're watching this movie, you don't know that they know each other. She's frozen. As he tells her to go on and keep taking off her clothes, he then cocks his gun intimidatingly to get her to take off her top. She opens it in the front, which is very sexy. And he walks up to her and they kiss. And as she pulls away, she says,
"Do you know what I wish? What? That once you'd get here on time."
This sequence it's so good.
Yeah.
And what's so crazy about it is that you're right. You really like these guys, right?
Yeah.
You just love them. And then we're in this scene and you're going, wait, what the fuck is going on?
Yeah.
Like, because it becomes suddenly really scary. And you go, wait, has the movie fooled me into really liking this guy? And now I'm seeing that he's a rapist, that he's terrifying.
Yeah.
And yet, it, as you said, it manages to, while being scary and tense, be really sexy. You know?
Yeah.
Like, and again, I'll have to say, so we've introduced Paul Newman and Rob Redford, two of the most beautiful men there are.
Yeah.
And now we get Katherine Ross among the most beautiful women of the 60s.
Right.
Like, it's like, okay, you know, there's some attractive people in this movie.
Yeah. And you know what? We've seen what Sundance can do with that gun.
Oh, yeah.
So when he cocks it, if you don't know their relationship, it absolutely has an air of like, what is going on here? Which makes me think after they make out that, or they kiss, is that this might be some role playing they like to do every once in a while in their lovemaking. So it's a fascinating scene for sure. Then we cut to the next morning. A lace curtain is billowing in the breeze by an open window, and we hear this deep voice outside saying,
"You are mine at the place. Mine. You hear me?"
It's Butch, and he's riding around on the bike that we just saw in front of the marshal there a couple of scenes ago, that he either stole or bought from the bike salesman as Etta and Sundance are in bed. Steve, do you think he bought it?
It never occurred to me to ask that question. I had always assumed he paid for it. But no, your suspicion is 100% correct. He doesn't pay for other things. No. So it's very possible that
he's very charming. I imagine he's saying, like, he may have been the first product representative being like,
sure,
hey, let me take this. I'll show it to my followers. Let me have it for free and they'll want to buy it. You know,
meet the future.
Etta walks out.
Do you know what you're doing?
Theoretically.
As he takes her on a bike ride, she questions if he knows what he's doing. And then we hear B.J. Thomas's song, Raindrops Keep Falling on My Head, for the first time in the movie, as they ride around this beautiful sequence, as they ride around through the grass, trees, vegetation, and the rest of the farm.
Raindrops keep falling on my head, and just like the guy whose feet are too big for his bed, nothing seems to fit.
Steve, as I said, this is a very sweet sequence in the movie that all of a sudden, halfway through this sequence, becomes this fast-paced, almost carnival-like music cue as Etta, who has been dropped off at a smaller barn, looks on laughing, throwing straw at Butch as he rides around, and then he crashes through one of the wooden fences into the bullpen. The music stops and the film goes silent again, kind of like it did in its first few seconds of the movie, until the bull chases him out, and as they both jump back on the bike, Raindrops Keep Falling on My Head kicks in. So your thoughts on this sequence? Because I got a lot of stuff on this sequence, because it's a very controversial sequence in a lot of critics' reviews of this movie. What are your thoughts on this sequence?
So I have many, many thoughts about it. And the first thing is it probably as a teenager, I didn't like it. And the reason I didn't like it was because as a teenager, the song Raindrops Keep Falling on Your Head had become so cheesy. You know what I mean? Like, it's a very specific late 60s, kind of easy listening sort of song.
Yes.
And when I was a teenager, that was not what I was into. So, and then I also go like, I just imagine the studio heads seeing the script and going, or seeing this cut and going, John Wayne didn't ride a bicycle.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, this is so not anything that would ever happen in a Western. Right. Then there's also this, it is modern sound, modern sounding dialogue, and now this completely anachronistic piece of music that doesn't fit in the Old West at all, and just ridiculous silliness. And now, as an adult and watching this time, I find the sequence to be pure joy.
Yeah.
I just love it. And I also, and this is something obviously we're going to talk about later as we go on, but it also is the first moment where you go, what is this relationship with Etta?
Yeah.
That this guy just comes along and they're having all this fun together. And one final thing, Paul Newman can do some nice moves on a bike.
Well, it's funny you bring that up, Steve, because during the filming of this movie, a stuntman was hired to do the bicycle tricks. But when George Roy Hill was very dissatisfied with what the stuntman was doing, Newman took over, did all the tricks himself.
Yeah.
So what you're seeing is Paul Newman doing this, all the tricks that you're seeing there on the bike. Now, this is a fascinating sequence. As I said, there are quite a lot of people who did not like this sequence. New York Times film reviewer Vincent Canby wrote that the raindrop sequence was part of an effort from the movie to play tricks on the audience by, quote, taking shortcuts to lyricism. Times critic criticized the raindrop sequence and said, quote, the scat singing soundtrack by Burt Bacharach at its most cacophonous, which made the film absurd and anachronistic, a term you just used. But Vanity Fair wrote recently that the song is an upbeat and indefatigable ode to feeling free. It remains an irresistible earworm and perfectly suited to a film that was made for its rebellious, radical times and went against the traditional Western grain. So I love that as a description for the song. Now, here's some interesting stuff about the song. There are only 7 music sequences in the entire film, according to film music expert John Burlingame, and it's because George Roy Hill did not want music playing under the dialogue, which means the soundtrack runs less than half an hour. And when they're coming up with this song, to give Burt Bacharach an idea of what he was looking for musically, George Roy Hill had the sequence cut to Simon and Garfunkel's song, Feeling Groovy, the 59th Street Bridge song.
That makes total sense.
Right? When you see it, it could totally work. And then watching the scene on a moviola, Bacharach knew the song would start with a ukulele, and he wrote this in his autobiography, Anyone Who Had a Heart. I wrote the entire melody, and the only words that kept running through my mind from top to bottom were raindrops keep falling on my head. Now, they originally pitched this song to Ray Stevens. Now, some of you who know Ray Stevens are going to be shocked to find this out. He turned down the song because he was working on the first version of Sunday Morning Coming Down with Chris Christopherson in the studio, and he thought if he gave up that song to do this song, someone else would come along and record it. Well, he got his version out. It did nothing. A year later, Johnny Cash did it, and it became a massive hit for Johnny Cash. Now, if you're asking if this is the Ray Stevens from such comedy songs as The Streak, which is about a guy streaking naked through a grocery store, It's Me Again, Margaret, about a stalker who keeps prank calling the woman he loves, the Mississippi Squirrel Revival, which is a song about a runaway squirrel going up the dresses and people's pants at a church revival, making it look like the Holy Spirit has possessed everybody in the church, and I Saw Elvis in a UFO, and Everything is Beautiful, which is actually a very sweet song from 1970. Yes, it's that same Ray Stevens. And he says he does regret turning it down because of how big the song became, but he also says that B.J. Thomas did a wonderful job singing the song. By the way, B.J. Thomas had laryngitis, and this was he only could do 5 takes of the song. So what you hear is the combination of all 5 takes of this song. It was the biggest song of B.J. Thomas's career, and he never got tired of singing it, he said.
It's so funny because it is such a specific era of late 60s, early 70s music that has literally nothing to do with the Old West. You know what I mean? And yet this is where this is a movie of the 70s, of the 60s, late 60s and 70s. It's where this is an experimental movie. And I can totally see why a certain generation of critics would go, this is terrible, because it doesn't fit in with how movies are supposed to work.
Yeah, but I love this sequence. I've always loved this sequence because I've always loved the song. I knew the song before I knew the movie, I think, or maybe in tandem, I
don't know.
I just always have loved this song. I've always loved B.J. Thomas's voice. And of course, for those of you who know, he also does the Growing Pains theme song. And I've always loved it. So, but I also think the song now in retrospect, I think is the perfect song for this movie because what is it about Butch and Sundance? They want to live in a world where they are free to do what they want to do at their pace and whenever they want to do it. This song is all about embracing the freedom of life and going with the sadness, going with whatever happens, and seeing that there's a brighter day in the future. So I kind of love the song for the movie now. And it's a great way to introduce Etta Place and the joy of Etta Place right after we had her introduced in such a slightly terrifying way. So it's a beautiful way to reset the film as well But I do think the sequence where he crashes through the fence and it goes silent and he gets back on the bike, that to me is a bit of a harbinger of what's going to come, because he can't handle the modern West. He won't be able to exist in the modern West. It doesn't work for him. So him crashing the bike makes sense.
And all his clever plans end up in disaster.
Yes.
You know?
Oh, great point, Steve. Absolutely.
And so, John, I now have another question for you from our patrons. And that is from Adam McAllister, who says, hey guys, as someone that watched this film for the first time recently, I was curious if they actually rode bicycles back in the 1890s. I understand this film is based on loose facts, but was curious what was fictional and what was real in this buddy Western. Loved the scene that introduced Raindrops Keep Falling on My Head. Adam.
Interesting question. I just assumed they did, because
they absolutely did.
Okay. Because I mean, like, I know that there are some historical facts of these characters that are being kind of moved around or massaged in order to fit the narrative, but something like a bicycle, you can actually pinpoint if that's going to be available around that time. So you're saying they did have it.
Absolutely. So I saw Adam's question, and I literally did, and anyone who wants to can do the same. I did a Google image search for bicycles through history pictures. And you got a little thing, and it's like 1860 that the first of those big front wheel bicycles come out. By 1890s, it looks exactly like the one that's in the movie. And this is what William Goldman says. He says they were a huge fad. Bicycles were a huge fad in the late 1800s, early 1900s, particularly as roads started to get more paved in cities. Then suddenly all sorts of people were using bicycles. So yes, this piece is 100% accurate.
No surprise. No surprise. All right, so back to the movie here. Butch and Etta off of that ride on their bicycle. Thank you to Adam for that wonderful question. They walk back to the house as the song ends. Raindrops keep falling on my head. They talk about Butch being broke and how he can't get a penny ahead.
Sundance says it's because you're a soft touch and always taking expensive vacations and buying drinks for everyone, and you're a rotten gambler.
Well, that might have something to do with it.
I love that Butch knows, you know?
Right. And isn't this an interesting moment, Steve? Because we just had them riding on the bike and all this stuff. And now we hear that Butch is broke. This is why they do this stuff. So again, breaking the convention of the standard criminal or the Western of the, because they would be obviously Butch and Cassidy on the other side of some of these heroic Westerns that we knew in the 40s and, or that our generations above us knew in the 40s and 50s. So the fact that you're turning him into essentially a blue collar worker, like, I work hard, and this is what he says. Butch says, I work hard, I can't seem to get ahead, can't seem to get a penny ahead. I work hard, I do all this. He's almost becoming a member of the working class by saying this. And then Etta calling him out, going, well, it's because you spend your money on this stuff and you buy rounds for everybody and you don't save your money. So it's an interesting commentary that they're making to make you maybe subconsciously feel like Butch is just another low-level worker trying to make it in this world, and make you care about him even more, like make the audience instinctively gravitate to supporting him even more in this situation. It's a fascinating exchange. It's a really quick exchange, but I think it does keep cementing the fact that he is kind of like this guy you can and want to cheer for, you know?
I think it's like a crazy magic trick. Because again, I'll go back to what I was saying before about compare this to Goodfellas. Right. Also characters that buy too many rounds, spend too much money, gambling their money away, and make mistakes.
Right.
And so that's exactly the same. And yet the way we feel about Ray Liotta and, De Niro and Pesci in Goodfellas is entirely different, because they're angry about it.
Yes.
And what they're doing to Rob is use violence. They're hurting people.
Yes.
Whereas that's not the feeling that we have about Butch and Sundance. And so it manages to thread this needle of going, yes, they are clearly professional criminals, and yet I can still totally like them.
Yeah, Butch and Sundance are in essence self-employed people, whereas Ray Liotta, Pesci, and De Niro working for a company, right?
That's a good point too.
I think it would be fascinating to have a movie about Flat-Nosed Curry and News Carver and what it's like for them to work for Butch and Sundance, because I guarantee you that's a completely different movie. And it's probably more in line with Goodfellas than this movie is, because those guys depend on Butch and Sundance coming up with scores And it's frustrating for them to sit around waiting for them to do it. So I imagine there's a lot of anger and bitterness towards Butch and Sundance if we were to see a movie from their point of view. So it's an interesting thing to contemplate, you know?
Butch, do you ever wonder if I'd met you first, we'd been the ones to get involved?
Well, we are involved, Ella, don't you know that? I mean, you are riding on my bicycle. In some Arabian countries, that's the same as being married.
Which elicits a very sweet response from Etta. She leans in, kisses him on his neck, and hugs him, just as Sundance kicks the door open and walks out.
This is one of the most amazing and mysterious relationships in all of film. I literally have been thinking about this relationship since I first saw the movie.
Oh, yeah.
Since I first saw the movie, I think, I mean, obviously I was a kid and I didn't think of it in a sophisticated way, but I've always gone, what exactly is this? What is happening? And I think, and it was funny because I knew we were going to be discussing this, and I was thinking, I was watching, it's like, in a modern sensibility, and I'm not trying to piss anybody off or anything, you could say like, oh, this is a polyamorous love story, you know? Sure. Like this is some combination that is ill-defined of three-way mutual love.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I don't think there's any implication in the movie that Butch is bisexual or that Butch is gay or that Sundance is or that they're actually sleeping all three together. I don't think there's any implication that Butch and Etta have done anything romantic together. I don't think that's in the movie.
No.
But I do think that this is true love between the three of them.
Oh, interesting.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And the thing that I think too, like the way that I interpret it, and this is just crazy thoughts in my brain, but is basically that Butch and Sundance together are one perfect man.
Yeah.
That each of them provide for Etta. There are things sexual and intense and passionate that Sundance is great for.
Right.
But Sundance wouldn't have taken Etta on this bike ride.
Nope.
And Sundance doesn't talk to Etta in the way that Butch is a talker, you know?
Yeah.
Butch is charming and funny and exciting and cultured in some ways and has ideas, and Sundance doesn't like that, you know? And so I think there's a part of Etta that loves Butch as much as she loves Sundance.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. And there are relationships like this in people's lives, so to speak. So yeah, they don't even move into a sexual nature. It's more a matter of like, we kind of understand what's going on here and we're cool with it. You know, because there's so many different versions of relationships in the world. And you'd be a fool to think there's only one way or two ways even of relationships to exist.
Hey, what are you doing? Stealing your woman?
Redford's physicality after that is just so, he's just kind of scratching his ass in his long johns or whatever. And just
Take her. Well, you're a romantic bastard, I'll give you that.
You see clearly, in a way, he's kind of defending Etta to Sundance for the way Sundance is just casually tossing her off onto Butch, right? And again, this is a relationship that we probably can't judge with as little exposure as we've had to it, but it's an interesting dynamic between the three of them because Etta's not like mad or pissed off about it.
I don't know. We watch her reaction.
Oh, yeah?
When Sundance says take her.
Uh-huh.
It is not, it's not furious, but it's not pleased.
Fair. Okay. So before we could see more of that reaction, we actually cut to them robbing the flyer again on the return trip. As Butch knocks on the door of the rail car with the safe, we hear a familiar voice.
I work for Mr. E.H. Harriman of the Union Pacific Railroad.
Hey, Woodcock!
What?
You okay?
Butch's superpower is his likability.
Yeah.
And again, I just keep thinking about it as I go like, can you imagine Joe Pesci having injured a person in a previous robbery, worrying whether or not they were okay at the next robbery?
Oh, no, because he didn't even go check in on Spider after he shot him in the foot, right? No. He didn't go check in on Spider. He go to the hospital.
Because Butch is not a sociopath.
No, exactly.
He's a nice guy.
No, he's not. Right, exactly. Sundance would have never done this. Butch does this, right?
You can't want to get blown up again.
Butch, you know that if it were my money, there is nobody that I would rather have steal it than you. But you see, I am still in the employ of Mr. E.H. Harriman of the Union Pacific Railroad.
And just then we hear an older woman's voice coming off the train. And when the gang tries to stop her, she is not being stopped. And she's always says, I ain't afraid of you. One of these kind of larger, strong women of that time and says, I'm a grandmother and a woman and I got my rights. She marches right past Sundance, who makes no effort to stop her.
I've fought whiskey and I've fought gambling. I can certainly fight you.
We got no time for this.
But then we cut to Woodcock, who hears the older woman protesting outside his door. Butch and Sundance then threaten her life, and then she starts to say the Our Father prayer, which causes Woodcock, who is clearly having an emotional dilemma because he's a good person and doesn't want someone innocent to die. It causes Woodcock to open the door to see that it was Butch imitating her voice.
Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven.
So what do you think about this unusual trick that they're pulling on Woodcock here to open though? They don't shoot through the door. They don't threaten his life. They just threaten this older woman's life. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, but they don't threaten her life. That's what I love about it is that they're not threatening.
Sundance says, if you don't open the door, we're going to take her out or something like
that. Does he mean that?
I don't know if he means it. I don't know.
No, it's not. It's not just that he doesn't mean it. What I believe has already happened is that he is already either Sundance has already grabbed her and is covering her mouth.
Yes.
Is that I think Butch is going, I'm not going to do anything. He's like waving and saying, no, I'm not going to do anything.
Good point. Yeah.
There's never any, they are creating a show for Woodcock's benefit that they are threatening this woman's life, even though they're not. I also think sound wise, and I should even listen to it again, maybe with headphones, is that I can't quite figure out exactly the moment when it becomes Paul Newman and not the old woman.
It's funny you bring that up because George Roy Hill had an issue with this scene. He said, I don't think that Paul Newman will be able to believably do the voice for the audience to accept this situation. And then Paul Newman believably did the voice.
It's so good.
Yeah. And so George was like, well, I guess I was wrong. And so they kept the scene in the movie and played it out exactly as William Goldman had written it. So yeah, it completely works because you're right. You cannot tell when the transition happens.
Yep.
Which speaks to Paul Newman's impressionistic ability, I guess.
You know what it's like, I think? I think it's like the moment with Sundance when we first meet Etta and he's holding the gun on her and we're going, oh no, is he going to be a bad guy? Right. This is the same beat, is that we're now hearing Butch threaten this old woman's life. And it's like, oh no, is Butch actually going to threaten this one? And then they open up the door and we see that that's not what's happening. And we go, oh, I get to still like these guys.
Yeah. Right.
You know?
Good point. Yeah, and as the door is opened, Woodcock realizes that he's been suckered, and he knows it. And then he worries immediately what he's going to tell E.H. Harriman. You know, it's a fascinating thing, Steve, about E.H. Harriman. Woodcock is the one who brings him up. We hear his name throughout the movie, and we find out why this situation is. Obviously, I spoke about it earlier in the episode, how he clearly was upset about Butch pulling this stuff. He tried to negotiate with Butch to get him to stop robbing his trains. But in the end, he had to take more drastic measures, as we're about to find out. But this idea of E.H. Harriman, like the way it's being built up, it's not a Godot situation necessarily, but it's like this phantom antagonist that is clearly there, that it carries a lot of weight because it's affecting people that Butch comes in contact with, you know? And I think it's an interesting way to kind of establish this guy without having seen him yet, you know.
I think so too. And I also think, and this is where, because this is also the emergence of one of the great screenwriters in screenwriting history, is that I think what William Goldman saw is like, E.H. Harriman is a funny name. Mr. E.H. Harriman is an even funnier name. Right. And the more we repeat Mr. E.H. Harriman from Woodcock, the more it creates this whole thing that's just, I hadn't thought about it, but it actually points out something about the movie as a whole, which is there's so many meaningless sort of bits of dialogue in the movie that are so much fun. That's what's working, is that it's the repetition of, I work for Mr. E.H. Harriman. It's like, and it's just fun.
Yeah. I mean, I would never call William Goldman a great comedic writer, yet there are some fantastic comedic moments.
I mean, in Princess Bride.
Well, right. But The Princess Bride still has that feeling throughout of like, there's real life and death situation going on here. So he writes comedy really well within a dramatic structure. And I think it's a true gift. It's a true gift. All right. So as Butch steps onto the rail car, he notices that the safe is like super fortified now. And he asks Woodcock, almost like he's hurt by the situation.
Woodcock, what'd you have to go and do something like that for?
Well, Butch, you blew the last one so easy, I just had to, do something.
Give me that. Get some more.
Butch tells News to go get a lot more dynamite. And then we cut to him standing with Sundance a few moments later. That's Butch outside the rail car now as the rail car completely explodes. The horses are spooked as all the wreckage lands on all of them.
Think there's enough dynamite there, Butch?
As we see all the money flying around in the air, and Sundance starts to laugh as the gang starts collecting the money off the ground.
It's one of the most amazing explosions ever in a movie. Yeah. And the reason is because the way explosions, you tend to do them is you shoot them with a long lens that compresses space so that the people can seem like they're much closer to the explosion than they really are.
Yeah.
They're actually much farther away. That's a general technique. And the other thing is they're never in the explosion. And the thing about the way this explosion happens is and I think maybe they use like balsa wood or something, so it's super, super light and not so dangerous, but they're in the debris field.
Yes.
You know what I mean? It's not like there's a distance to them that's made shorter by a long lens. Right. It's that, no, they actually are getting hit by things from the explosion. It is terrifying. It is a really scary explosion.
That's what people don't realize. You know those cool shots when things are exploding behind actors? They legitimately can feel the heat of the explosion, but they have to play like it's a badass moment. And it's cool and all, but it is scary. You know, I've been on sets with explosions and with wind talkers, and it is really scary how these guys can, which is why it's a funny character Danny McBride plays in Tropic Thunder, because when you're on set with these guys who do explosions, first of all, they're incredibly safe. They're incredibly clear, but they're also very, very clear with you about like, this is the area you need to be in. Don't step out this area because anything can happen. And what have you. But when you feel the heat of an explosion the first time, you really understand and grasp like how unsettling that must be. All right. Wreckage is landing around them. The money is in the air, but Sundance is laughing at it as the gang starts to collect all the money into their hats, into their pockets. And just then we hear and then see this train approaching, as do Butch and Sundance. And they seem concerned as they look on it. And then we see this train in its full scope, and it's a single-car train. And Butch asks rather ominously,
"What the hell is that?"
Steve, this is an ominous intro for this this train.
Again, this is where I go like, man, George Roy Hill at this moment really is a master filmmaker, because the build of tension. First, you had the comedy with Mr. E.H. Harriman. You have the insanity of the explosion.
Yeah.
You have the joy of it's literally raining money and we're collecting it. And then suddenly there's this train out of nowhere. And the way he cuts from person to person and the observations and I think that the realization that it's a one-car train, you just go, oh shit, we don't know what it is.
Right.
But the ominous nature of the approach of this train is palpable.
Right. And clearly the train was going behind this train at a certain distance, so that it would be able to come upon them if that train had been hijacked or taken over or robbed. I'm sure that Woodcock...
That was my question. I was just going to ask, does Woodcock know? You think Woodcock knows?
I think Woodcock knows. Listen, this is the game. We're both professionals. I'm going to protest for you to not rob my stuff, but I'm not going to give you what I know. So just like you tricked me with the old woman, or the older woman, I just tricked you by not telling you about this other train that was coming down the track. We're all professionals in this game. And so I think that's what happened here. Yeah. Do you think he knew?
It had never occurred to me until just this last time. And I think logically you are correct. He must have known.
Yeah.
My judgment of that person's performance, that character in that scene, is that guy doesn't know.
Oh,
That's my feeling, but it never occurred to me until this time.
Well, you can make a case that Harriman didn't want to tell him because he knew the guy could probably squeal. Yep. You know, that's a great point. We'll have to make our own decisions about that. But I also want to bring up something that you just said, Steve. The quick cuts are very similar to the quick cuts that George Roy Hill did when Harvey Logan was challenging Butch, right?
Yep.
These are the things that he uses to increase tension. It's very smart things to do that. And a very skilled filmmaker and editor, and it's important to bring up the editor in this, and I'm sure you would agree with this, have to understand how to cut, how long to make those shots, and what shots to use to build up the tension, right? And I think that's what's great, because the last shot is the whistle going off on the train here as the door flies open and 6 of these riders come bounding out of the rail car.
The shot of them coming out of the train.
Yeah.
Is one of the most amazing, spectacular moments. It's just super dramatic. Mm-hmm. It definitely reminds me of some of the shots with the horses in Lawrence of Arabia.
Yes.
When they freed the horses off of the train. But the other thing, and this is what I read about this, is that, of course, there is no way for horses standing still inside a train car to come up to full speed to leap out of the train car.
Yeah, right.
It's not possible. What they did was they built a long ramp on the other side of the car. And what it is that the horses are running up and they open the doors and they all leap out.
Wow.
Which I think, again, I just love going I'm sure George Roy Hill said, I want them leaping out of the car. And the horse guys are like, they can't do that. You need a running start. And so they figure out how to give them a running start.
Yeah. Smart shot for sure.
Whatever they're selling, I don't want it.
They run to their horses here, but 2 of the gang get killed as they're trying to leave, which leaves 4 of the gang members left.
Hey, Butch! What? They're very good!
Then we see Butch say, split up, and the 4 remaining members of the hole-in-the-wall gang on this robbery split up, 2 of them going down to the lower level, Butch and Sundance going down to the upper level of the mountain.
How many of them are following us?
All of them?
All of them? What's the matter with those guys?
This is the opening of one of the greatest chase scenes of all time. Arguably the greatest chase scene of any Western of all time, the searchers aside, being that whole movie is kind of a chase. But I think the setup of what will come to be known as the Super Posse is absolutely perfect. From the train, leaping out of the train, killing people from a distance, and Butch saying these guys, they're good. Mm-hmm. All of that stuff, to them choosing just ignoring half of the hole-in-the-wall gang to chase Butch and Sundance is a perfect setup to these adversaries that we're never actually going to meet.
I agree. And I think this is the beginning of the end of Butch and Sundance.
Oh, absolutely.
Right? And again, this is them doing their Old West stuff in the way they're tricking Woodcock, the way they're using their dynamite, the way they're getting to the money. And here comes modernization, which is a person with money who is smart, runs the railway, and is not going to be bullied by these criminals. So he outthinks them by having a train. And this is probably like a high-end train that is like a beta train, shall we say, or beta program of a train that they're trying out in this situation in order to be able to use it on other train robbers down the road. So it's modernization with one rail car, and yes, it's horses, but these are much more highly trained people who are determined, like the Pinkertons, to go and get them. So it's that we're now beginning the end of Butch and Sundance and their ways of doing things with this moment.
Yep, absolutely.
And with this moment, I think this is a good time for us to stop part 1 of Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid and think about where we're going. Is the Super Posse going to catch them? Where do Butch and Sundance go? Now, I'm sure a majority have seen the movie already. You know what's going to happen. But at this point, we can stop here and think, what is going to happen? And why didn't they chase the other 2 guys down in the lower areas of the valley? Was it Sundance's black jacket? Did they know he always wears darker colors, so they knew to go after him? We'll have a lot of questions answered as we go into part 2, Steve.
And we would love to hear all of your thoughts about Butch and Sundance. You can go to our Facebook page. Just do a search for the Cine-Files on Twitter. It's Cine_Files, the Cine-Files podcast on Instagram. And of course, if you want to follow the show, you can subscribe to it on YouTube or on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, of course. If you're on Apple Podcasts and haven't left a review, leave us a review.
Yeah.
Spotify now has all abilities not only to leave reviews, but you can actually comment on individual episodes, which is really fun to see. So if you have comments on our discussion of Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, you could leave one right here on this episode, and we'd love to hear that on Spotify. You can buy or stream this film along with every other movie we've ever reviewed on cinephiles.net. And you can support the show, as we mentioned at the very top, at patreon.com/the Cine-Files, or on Apple Podcasts for ad-free versions of the show and our Cine-Files shorts. And if you want to reach me, it's SR Morris on Twitter, SR Morris1 on Instagram. John, how would they reach you?
Oh, you can always reach me at The Rocha Says on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok, The Outlaw Nation on Twitch, my YouTube channel, youtube.com/John Rocha Says, and my other podcasts there, The Geek Buddies and The Hot Mic, that are there for you all to subscribe to and enjoy.
And I think that's it for this week. I cannot wait to saddle up again to continue our exploration of Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid next time on the Cine-Files.